Israel is in crisis. Despite the bravado of an elite which has committed genocide and is committing genocide, this is a state in crisis, in turmoil. Indeed, the genocide will end up one day, in my view, spelling the end of the entire ethno-nationalist, ethno-supremacist project. Now, we've got a lot of important things to talk about here. Yesterday, the Israeli government unanimously voted to fire the state's Attorney General, Gali Baharav Miara. This is because of corruption allegations against the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is himself, of course, subject to an arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. These allegations in Israel center on bribery, on fraud, on breach of trust, attempting to secure favourable media coverage. These allegations date back several years, and there is supposed to be a process to, well, put the guy on trial. There's also allegations centred on his advisors with claims of illicit payments from Qatar. Netanyahu has responded in typical demagogic fashion, claiming there's a left-wing deep state conspiracy against him. He's managed to drag out the trial he faces and indeed has used the genocidal onslaught against the Palestinian people of Gaza for those purposes, as well as all the other wars of aggression he's been waging. The broader context is a previous attempt to reduce the power of the judiciary, which triggered a constitutional crisis. Now, Israel's not a democracy. It's an ethnocracy. It subjects Palestinians to a brutal occupation, depriving them of basic rights. But this represented a shift towards naked authoritarianism, even on its own terms. Now, before I discuss the further elements of Israel's crisis and the hideously new unveiled plans for Gaza, there is this argument that Israel's onslaught on Gaza has been dragged out in the interest of Netanyahu's survival. Now, last month, the New York Times, which has been guilty itself of dire coverage of the genocide, had a story headlined How Netanyahu Prolonged the War in Gaza to Stay in Power. It discussed how in April 2024, there's a proposal which could have created a window for negotiations with Hamas over a permanent truce, allowing for the release of hostages. The New York Times added that the devastation of Gaza, where roughly 2 million people were trying to survive daily attacks, could have come to a halt. But this would have meant losing the support of far-right ministers who wanted to occupy and colonize Gaza. And if they collapsed the ruling coalition, then Netanyahu would lose the elections and be forced to stand trial for corruption. As a result, the proposal died a death and the genocidal slaughter continued. This all needs a heavy caveat. For some of Israel's cheerleaders, the strategy has been make Netanyahu the convenient bogeyman in order to protect Israel. The argument here is this historic crime is because of a bad man in power in Israel, rather than focusing on where settler colonialism inevitably leads. But this is dishonest. The Israeli opposition has backed Israel's genocidal onslaught from day one, and so is the overwhelming majority of the Israeli public, with polls showing that most Jewish citizens of Israel, as opposed to 20% who are Palestinian citizens, support everything from mass destruction to deliberate starvation. The main opposition leader is Yair Lapid, himself a former prime minister. Here's what he said over a month into the genocide.
The majority of people who were killed were Hamas terrorists. People are saying this number, 12,000 people were killed. Yes, the Hamas is an army of 40,000 people, and many of them were killed, and good riddance. And again, there are civilians who were hurt, and this is what happens when you have a very dense populated area that is, you're engaged in a war in a very densely populated area.
There he was spreading the vile lie that the majority of Palestinians slaughtered by the Israeli army were Hamas terrorists and saying of their murder, good riddance. Then there's this member of his political party, Debbie Bitten. When people ask me what I want in Gaza, I say I don't want anything in Gaza. I just want there to be a beach. As they say, we shall see the sea from Sderot. Okay? That's discussing a nearby Israeli town. Well, it's just straightforwardly genocidal. I mean, that's supposed to be a centrist, moderate, or whatever you call that sort of person in the Western media. And they're just calling for Gaza to be emptied of its people, of any living Palestinian. Then there's another of these opposition figures. She also belongs to the same party led by Yair Lapid. That's Mervav Cohen. She supported the deliberate starvation of the Palestinian people of Gaza.
The only danger they face is obesity. What is the logic in sending them 200 trucks a day? Clearly we can't send them humanitarian aid. They sell it, recruit more terrorists. Is this how we will get the hostages back?
So I think the plan that Giora presented here and the other generals is very smart because it sets clear rules of the game. We need to implement it, but we need to do it while remembering that it is a tool for applying pressure, with the goal being to bring back the hostages. And if they return the hostages to us, we will be ready to stop.
This is a structural problem. It's what happens when you get a settler colonial state based on the theft of the land of indigenous people who you have to dehumanize to justify stealing from, oppressing, and indeed, of course, murdering. Here's another striking example, though, of Israel's crisis. Around 600 former Israeli security officials, including former heads of the Mossad, that's the security services, of course, in Israel, the foreign security services, rather than the Shin Bet domestically, the military, they've written an open letter pleading with Donald Trump to pressure Israel to end its onslaught in Gaza. They write, your credibility with the vast majority of Israelis augments your ability to steer the Prime Minister Netanyahu. They also write, it is our professional judgment that Hamas no longer poses a strategic threat to Israel. The argument focuses on how to save the remaining hostages. Well, look, I mean, let's not pretend the vast majority of these people are driven by any form of genuine compassion towards the Palestinian people. They're obviously aware that the vast majority of Israel's hostages have been released as part of ceasefire deals and hostage prisoner swaps, and that the Israeli military has killed more hostages than it's rescued by military means. It's also just important to just know what they say about Hamas posing no strategic threat. I mean, to be honest, that was the case all the way along. I mean, what happened is Israel had sealed off Gaza before the 7th of October. It was just, an open-air prison. And they believed they had successfully divided the Palestinian national movement so that you had the West Bank ruled by Fatah and Gaza by Hamas, which suited them just fine. I mean, that's why they had the deal with Qatar, which has now led to a corruption scandal, because they believed it was in their interest to have Hamas in Gaza and Fatah in the West Bank and no unified Palestinian movement. And then they could say, well, we don't have a so-called partner in peace. We can just, and Gaza sealed off and we occasionally mow the lawn, which is how they describe the murderous onslaughts that they keep waging against the people in Gaza before the 7th of October, in which they committed terrible war crimes over and over again. But what that meant is they didn't guard the border. I mean, they were obviously too busy, for example, using their military forces in, for example, the West Bank, where they saw the jewel in the crown in terms of annexing in practice and settling and stealing Palestinian land there. And if they had military forces on the border in actual real numbers, then 7th October wouldn't have happened. I mean, this genocidal onslaught is not actually, of course, it's never been about, stopping Hamas from being able to do that again, because they could have just done that in the first place. What they've been doing is, what they're doing at the moment is they're just bombing every day apocalyptic rubble. It's a farce to suggest that there's any military threat to Israel emanating from Gaza at all. I mean, it is the apocalypse. It's just murdering for its own sake as part of a plan to ensure that no living Palestinians remain in Gaza. It's genocide. That's it. I mean, it's ludicrous to think that there was that Hamas represent any threat. It's just a lie, which is just constantly wheeled out and presented in order to justify genocide. It's just an obvious statement of fact. But here's something else. A state which is founded on ethnic supremacy, which is constantly radicalizing as a hothouse of genocidal extremism, which is structurally impelled to relentlessly expand and steal land, to colonize, which is at permanent war with its neighbors, not sustainable. And one reason, by the way, it's not sustainable, some of the more strategically savvy pro-Israel voices understand, is Israel's entirely dependent on Western states, and specifically the United States, for all those weapons, diplomatic support, trade, all the rest. I mean, the EU actually is the single biggest trading partner. Increasing numbers of people in the West are being politicized and radicalized. They've heard too much, they've seen too much, they've read too much. This genocide for them is a Rubicon. People have been changed forever. In the US itself, there's an unprecedented popular shift against Israel. And that's not just among progressively inclined Americans, but on the right as well. I mean, you've got people on the right now talking about genocide in the United States. This genocide is a point of no return. It's a point of no return for so many in the West. And that will mean in the not too distant future that Israel will no longer have the military and economic ability to maintain the supremacist project. Now, yesterday, Israeli media reported Netanyahu is set to announce plans to fully occupy Gaza. To be clear, as international law made clear before, Gaza was already under occupation before the genocide began. That's what international law said, because Israel controlled Gaza's borders, its airspace, everything around population registry, even its electromagnetic spectrum, the means of communication in Gaza. It repeatedly sent its army into Gaza to commit terrible war crimes. What this plan is talking about in practice is an even further murderous escalation. We're already seeing mass slaughters of Palestinians every day, not least those who've been deliberately starved by Israel as they go to aid points in order to try and feed their starving families. It also means this plan driving the survivors into a concentration camp, which is, as it's been described by the likes of Ehud Olmert, the former which should be important to note, a right-wing former Israeli prime minister. He was a member of Likud, Netanyahu's party, for decades. With those who refusing to go to that concentration camp killed. And then the mass deportation of the remaining survivors so that Gaza is entirely emptied of its people. And then Gaza would be colonized by Israel. That is the plan. That is the open plan. It is naked genocide. I just want to finally draw attention to something else. And this is a report by ITV's Emma Murphy. Just watch this clip.
Building by building, Gaza is being erased. Cities like broken skeletons laid waste by war. Graveyards of life and lives. The streets, homes and coffee houses of old now cast to the ground. The soul of this place, along with the souls who lived here, brought to ruin in the rubble and dust. Israel bans foreign journalists from entering Gaza. 15,000 feet above is the closest we get to seeing for ourselves the consequences of the war it is waging here. When we joined an airdrop last week, Israel also tried to restrict images from above being filmed or shown. Aid being dropped from this flight is to those who are trying to survive in this hell. This was Gaza before the bombs started falling, a place of life where normal lives were lived. There is no sign of that normality now. This is one of the explosions which destroyed Gaza, targeting the Turkish-Palestine Friendship Hospital, the only specialist cancer hospital in Gaza. This is what's left of it now. This was the Al Wafa Old People's Home. We can't say what's become of its residents. This was a primary and secondary school. We can't say what became of the pupils. Many of the other ruins were homes. We can't say whether those that lived here survived or are among the 60,000 now dead. Under international law, it is a war crime to target schools, hospitals and other civilian sites. This landscape of destruction looks otherworldly, yet it's not. It is this world, and what is happening may yet come to define one of its darkest eras, one that casts a stain on humanity which will endure for generations.
Goodness me, Emma, those pictures, it's hard to overstate the extent of the destruction, isn't it?
It is, and we only flew over part of Gaza, but the areas we flew over were completely devastated, and it's very difficult from the height we were, because we're not allowed in, to actually get any more detail than we managed to get there. But it was perfectly clear that there were huge areas of complete destruction, and the people were still trying to live within those areas. You could see on certain pictures just a little bit of movement where people were obviously just trying to eke out some form of survival there. And we also got the opportunity to speak to people who were leaving Gaza through Jordan, through medical evacuations. And it was very clear from speaking to them just how desperate that situation is. We can't get in order to say and show ourselves directly, but their testimonies were incredibly strong. They spoke of the devastation. They spoke of there being very little left of Gaza, and they kept speaking over and over again about their hunger. These are children who'd lived through war and who also had very, very serious injuries. But when we asked them how they felt, the only thing they told us was how poorly they felt, the pains in their stomachs and their need for food.
This is a devastating piece of reporting, and it should be applauded. But it is the sort of reporting we should have had from day one if the Western media had accurately reported on the crime of the century. Israeli leaders and officials made very clear from the beginning what they were going to do, and they did it. They said they were going to wipe Gaza from the face of the earth. They said they were going to deliberately starve its people and besiege the essentials of life. They made very clear they saw the Palestinian people of Gaza as the enemy, that there was no demarcation between what was seen as civilians and military targets. And then they just did it in front of everyone. I mean, in October 2023, mass extermination. Within a couple of months, Gaza was a different color and texture when we looked up from space. This isn't new. I know people now, there's this sudden shift, isn't it? I know now there's this sudden shift that many of those who facilitated Israel's genocide, the politicians, the media outlets, they're beginning to realize that this really will be remembered as one of the great crimes of our age. And they fear the reckoning that is to come. Well, they're right to fear it. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts and your comments. Help us keep taking on the pro-genocide media at patreon.com/ownjaz84. We've not been as active on the video channel as of late because on YouTube, because I'm finishing a book called The Fall of the West, which I will tell you about in due course. So I've just been trying to keep it going as best as possible, because I can't stop speaking about the genocide. I know some people, you do a book and you're supposed to disappear, but alas, given the dearth of people who've been using their platform in the Western media to oppose this genocide, either because they support the genocide or because they're cowards who know a terrible crime is being committed but fear the reputational and career consequences of speaking out, don't really have a choice but to keep talking about it. So, but just to bear that in mind, we'll take everything to a whole new level when I finally finish the book, which is, I'm getting there. Difficult. Big dramatic book, but I'm very excited about it. So anyway, share the video, listen to the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.